Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara, Cam, and two special guests today who will be joining me for a deep dive into the consumer side of Florida's property insurance crisis. We've got Amy Boggs, the CEO of Boggs Law Group, who is also the chairwoman of the property insurance section of the Florida Justice Association. Amy represents consumers in insurance claim disputes. We also have Jim Saunders, the executive editor of the News Service of Florida, here with me in the terracotta room. So stick with us. We'll take a deep dive into how Florida's property insurance woes are affecting consumers and what the legislature might be doing in a special session next month.
Carriers need to pay their claims. There's not one homeowner that wants to be in a lawsuit. Think of your neighbor, your mother, your sister. Do they want to be in a lawsuit? No. These are not fraudulent fraudsters hanging out in the panhandle making Hurricane Michael claims.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
I am very pleased to have two special guests with us today. Amy Boggs, CEO of Boggs Law Group. We are going to take a deep dive into the property insurance situation in Florida, another deep dive, actually. And again, a special treat for our listeners. We are joined by News Service of Florida executive editor, Jim Saunders. He's sitting with me in the terracotta room, and we have Amy Boggs with us. Amy is also the chairwoman of the property insurance section of the Florida Justice Association. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Dara, for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you about the property insurance issues in the state of Florida today.
So we know that we just had a massive Hurricane Ian, wiped through southwest Florida and into central Florida, going to have an impact on insurance, an already sort of hobbled property insurance market in Florida. What's going to be the fallout from Ian?
I think we have a number of things that I can predict will be happening if carriers, and really this largely turns on whether carriers step up and pay their claims timely and fully, or whether they delay and wrongfully deny claims. The one path, right, where they properly and timely pay their claims, folks get their insurance claim money, they work with their mortgage company, they get a contractor, they get their home rebuilt, they're back in their home, and the property values and the community can rebuild. The other path is that the carrier denies or delays the claim. We've had carriers that have denied on the phone, just said, hey, this is a flood claim.
Right.
It has nothing to do with wind. And in those situations, you have a really the beginning of a parade of horribles. You have folks living in RVs. I have some clients who still from Hurricane Michael 4 years ago are still living in an RV with their 8 children in their driveway. Trying to rebuild, and their carrier just went belly up after, a long time. So long story short, what that leads to is people can't rebuild. They wind up going into kind of a foreclosure crisis, which of course impacts the real estate market and so on. And these communities cannot rebuild. You have a loss of, people going to school. You have no place for the teachers and the firefighters to live. And these communities essentially die. And they're held hostage in some ways by the carriers and their decisions about how they're going to handle their claims.
Well, it's interesting that you were diving right into the flood versus wind issue right off the bat, because we had Fred Karlinski, Greenberg Traurig. He has a long title. I'm not going to I'm not going to remember it right now, but he's been helping to craft insurance laws for quite a while in Florida. And he was saying that people aren't not going to like to hear this, but that Ian was largely a flood event and most people are not covered for flood insurance. So,
Right.
if that's already happening, what are people to do? You can't really, most people can't afford out of pocket to rebuild their homes.
Right. And, I would challenge the overall assessment about Hurricane Ian. If you look at the actual models and the wind speeds and how that hurricane evolved and then hit, it was, and hurricanes are a wind event, right? They carry with them flood surge, and so you will have flooding, but you also have a wind component, clearly, or it's not a hurricane. In fact, hurricanes are measured on their wind speed. The narrative from the insurance industry from the beginning, before they went down and looked at claim number one, the narrative was this is largely a flood event. And that, I don't know, they put that out into the public and into the ether, and folks have adopted that. So hurricanes are multi-peril events. So that their wind and their flood. The wind, traditional insurance, old school, the way that it's supposed to be, is the wind carrier pays for the wind damage and the flood carrier pays for the flood damage. And so even if you're not insured for flood, you have a home inland, you didn't realize you needed flood insurance, you should at least get covered for your wind damage, and you learn a hard lesson about the flood damage. But the fact that there's also a flooding event doesn't absolve the carrier, the wind carrier, from paying for the wind damage.
Right. So there's both. It's not just one or the other.
Right. This isn't a situation where you had a river, flood, overflow its banks, causing a flooding. We see that up in Nashville and so forth. Here you have a wind event that destroyed things, and then you had a flood event. And so the question is, how much wind and how much flood impacted the structure? And just so you know, that really requires an engineer who works with weather professionals and checks wind speeds that have been measured, et cetera, et cetera. And so to make a blanket statement that this is largely flood, or for a carrier to deny a claim on the phone without
Right.
ever setting foot is just atrocious.
Yeah. So one of the things Fred said that the Florida insurance market is a very, very volatile market that needs to change in order for the market to be sustainable into the future.
This has crept up on a lot of people, and it's interesting how quickly things can go wrong in insurance, and that's what's happened here. And I think a lot of the litigation that we've seen over the last couple of years is unprecedented.
So the legislative leaders for years now have been blaming litigation on the property insurance, the market instability, saying first it was sinkholes, then it was mold, now it's roofs, and it's unscrupulous lawyers essentially and contractors that are behind this property insurance crisis that we find ourselves in now. I'd like you to respond to that. And also, though, if we've got insurers now denying claims over the phone from Ian, isn't that going to lead to more litigation?
You've hit the nail on the head, Dara. The litigation statistics, which we take issue with how those were cobbled together, and I can get to that in a minute. The statistics are a reflection of poor claims handling or intentional poor claims handling, right? So you have a situation where people wind up having to sue their insurance company to get the benefits they were entitled to under the policy to begin with. The idea, in the face of unprecedented large storms in the last 4 years, Ian, Etta, Sally, Michael, and you look at these communities and these homes that are devastated, the fact that the insurance industry is still saying, well, hey, we're just getting sued for no reason, it's almost laughable at this point. These are people that have been underpaid, not a little, not for a roof. This isn't about a roof that's missing a shingle. That's not what the litigation is largely about. It's largely about people who have been underpaid hundreds of thousands of dollars in their claim. You know, how long does it take a working person to save $100,000, really, or two, to step up and have to take their life savings to rebuild their home because their insurance carrier is denying their claim or underpaying it grossly is unfair. So from my perspective, and from the perspective of the professionals that I know that are out there every day fighting for policyholders, the high litigation rates are a reflection of an insurance industry that's been able to run amok and roughshod over folks.
So what's
what's the solution?
Yeah.
It's an unpopular solution, but if they if the penalty for underpaying or not paying the claims were stiffer. Here's an example. And I don't want to get into the weeds on the statistics, but I can just touch on this. And I think you have the Bernie Birnbaum report where he points out some of this, that the high litigation statistics in the state of Florida are accompanied by statistics in other areas that indicate poor claims handling. So we have a high rate of claims that are not paid within the first 90 days, high rate of claims closed without payment. So there are certain indices in the insurance industry that say, hey, you have an insurance market that's acting appropriately. Look, they're paying their claims in 30 days. They're not denying claims. And so we're high in those things. So the correlation between high litigation statistics and behavior is really related to the carrier's behavior, right? And so again, experts and professionals will surmise that do this. People from the NAIC will surmise that this is a state where policyholders are left to their own devices. We don't have an insurance commissioner like in the state of Louisiana who's going to stand up and say, hey, listen, get out there and pay your claims or else, who's going to investigate fraudulent claims handling practices. We have an insurance commissioner and a CFO, frankly, who have let the industry do what they want to. So the solution to this, and it's unpopular, is to make some common sense changes. For example, carriers are supposed to pay their claims in 90 days. We saw in Hurricane Michael, they went 90, 120, 6 months, et cetera, with impunity. That statute clearly says pay in 90 days, and the penalty for doing that is that you pay some extra interest, but you don't have the right to sue to enforce that. There's no enforcement mechanism. Right, so we asked, hey, that should be changed. That law was passed, everyone agreed 90 days is a fair number of days to adjust a claim.
But if they don't, what?
Exactly, Dara, exactly. It's so what? And so if we look at the way claims are being handled with the laws that are on the books, you hear about the one-way attorney's fees.
Yes.
Which is another subject I can talk.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, that's something we want to talk about. No, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, I don't want to jump around, but those types of things are meant to level the playing field. So the one-way attorney's fees is a misnomer. So what happens is that if you're a policyholder and you have to sue your insurance company to get the benefits you are entitled to, right? That means that a jury or an arbitration panel has come back and said, you know what, you were in fact underpaid. That telephone denial of your wind damage claim in the hurricane was wrong. You don't get extra damages. There's no punitive damage. There's nothing special. You get what you were entitled to from day one to begin with. What the legislature said years ago, and it's been policy in the state of Florida, is that if you have to do that, because we know that the insurance companies have more money than God, we're going to have them reimburse you for the law fees and costs that it cost you to prove that you had a valid claim. And that's fair, right? How could a homeowner undertake 4 years of expensive litigation? So what happened last year, and by the way, during the litigation, the carrier can look at the case and say, I think we did not pay properly, and we want to offer to settle the case. And they can do what's called an offer of judgment. And if the homeowner doesn't accept it, and then the carrier was right at the end of the day, that number that they offered to settle was correct, the carrier's fees get paid by the homeowner. So there's a very simple mechanism that happens early in a case where the carrier can turn the tables on that, right, and get their own fees reimbursed. So that's a little known fact. It's funny that it's a little known fact because in almost every case that I have, they do that. The insurance companies do that. It's a matter of course. So
excuse me, if they settle, essentially, then the homeowner has to eat the costs of the litigation.
Well, so the settlement would involve some payment, typically, for right. So because they realize that the homeowner ultimately, by the way, the attorneys have a contract with the homeowner. The homeowner has to pay them. It's a matter of, does that come out of their insurance benefits, or does the carrier have to pay it? Right? Those are the two choices here. And so, and you know, homeowners, carriers, or attorneys, work for nothing until the end of the case, right? We're not billing the homeowner every week for time we spent on the phone with them and so on and so forth. And it's a fair system that has worked for years. What happened last year is the legislature said, you know what, the carriers are getting sued too much. So we want you to send a letter before you sue and tell them you're about to sue. And by the way, homeowners don't come to us on the first day of their claim. They come after they have really exhausted all of their efforts. I've represented judges, attorneys, you know, surgeons, people who are intelligent, who have tried really hard to get their claim paid, and they've exhausted all efforts. So they want us to give a last minute notice, and then we measure our fee recovery, the homeowner's fee recovery, based on that number that we put out. So in order to get, say, half of our fees paid, we have to meet a certain number, et cetera. So that's already been modified. The interesting thing, Dara, and I don't want to get in the weeds, is that in doing that, we have to measure our case at the very beginning, and the carrier still really has the ability to make a mid-litigation offer and make the homeowner responsible for their fees. So it's just an unfairness, and it stems back to carriers need to pay their claims. There's not one homeowner that wants to be in a lawsuit. Think of your neighbor, your mother, your sister. Do they want to be in a lawsuit? No. These are not fraudulent fraudsters hanging out in the panhandle making Hurricane Michael claims.
Governor DeSantis said he wants the legislature to hold a special session post Ian during sometime in December, probably. And it's assumed or guessed that some insurance changes will be included in that. Some of the things that were not addressed during the other special session on insurance that we had earlier this year. So my understanding is that the one-way attorney fees, I'm using air quotes here in the terracotta room, would likely be something that would be included in that session. Do you have any idea of what the legislature might do and what the impact of it might be?
I think what they've been pushing for all along is to have a loser pays situation. And so if the homeowner loses, they have to pay the carrier's fees. And if the carrier loses, the carrier has to pay the homeowner's fees. And so what's the impact of that? The impact of that is that there are fewer attorneys who are probably going to be willing to help folks. And it scares homeowners, right? So their claim has been underpaid by $20 or $30 or $40,000. They don't want to, and it's in those smaller claims really that you see the impact. they don't want to run into a situation where they might have to pay the insurance companies fees. And so it's a chilling effect, really, on homeowners' right and access to courts. And I question, when we go into special session, my hope, sincere hope, is that David Altmaier, our insurance commissioner, does a deep dive into the last 6 insurance companies that went into receivership. Where are those financials? Where is that analysis? What we do know is that the 6 carriers who were analyzed before that, ending in 2017, that's the last forensic that's been done, those 6 all involved self-dealing and malfeasance, mismanagement essentially, and stealing is what I would say. So I think we're in a situation where the legislature is going to fix a problem that they haven't even really fully identified. It's a great soundbite to say, well, it's litigation. Let's look at your documents. Let's look at your financials and see what actually happened here.
By December, do you think it'll be evident how insurers are handling claims from Ian, and whether there's going to be a bunch of litigation coming out of Ian, and would that influence the debate during the special session?
Typically, attorneys are not really called on claims until there's been a denial or an underpayment that the policyholder can't negotiate on their own. So we do, like we already have a case in my office where the carrier just denied, said we're not paying for a new roof, period. So I think we'll have some idea. I don't have much faith in their handling claims well. In fact, from what I've seen, what I have heard, their instructions to their adjusters have been to, cut the estimates, don't pay for roofs, things of that nature. And so I think it's getting worse. And I'm sorry, but they're emboldened to do that by the legislature that is giving them opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to have, no recourse for poor claims handling.
Well, Governor DeSantis has repeatedly said that it's more of a water event than a wind event. I mean, he's been saying that since the hurricane hit. Do you think that's going to be a problem for you?
I think that's a problem for homeowners. When you think of me or you think of attorneys, think that I represent 100 or 200, my firm, homeowners. So instead of seeing the face of the attorney, see, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this elderly couple, the woman whose husband died waiting for her claim to be paid. These are all true, real stories of people. So we represent these people. So yes, Governor DeSantis getting out front and calling this without any real knowledge about individual homes, calling this a flood event, probably will impact folks' ability to recover. And again, you need an engineer to decide that. Back in the day, before the carriers, again, kind of started really, really abusing the process, adjusters would go out. The flood adjuster and the wind adjuster would meet out at the property. They'd say, okay, we see a flood line that's 2 feet high. Flood's going to pay for everything below. Wind's going to pay for everything above. They'd shake hands, and that was a done claim. No litigation, no problem. We don't have that today. And that's not the fault of the policyholder or an attorney or a public adjuster. That's the fault of the insurance industry.
We'll be right back with insurance claim dispute attorney Amy Boggs and News Service of Florida executive editor Jim Saunders.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara.
Is there anything unusual from the standpoint that Florida's market is dominated by the domestic carriers, a lot of Florida-based carriers that are relatively small? Does that influence either claims handling or litigation? Does that play into this picture at all?
So I'm not a regulatory specialist. I know enough, but I'm really a claims person. I will say this, that the surplus lines market has its own challenges. For example, if you have a claim with Lloyd's of London or AIG, your policy is issued under the laws of New York or Tennessee or some foreign jurisdiction, and you have to sue or go to our mandatory arbitration in that foreign jurisdiction. So you have, in Florida, we have a lot of, non-English speaking folks. How do you explain to your non-English speaking client that we have to fly to New York and have this very expensive litigation up there that the homeowner has to pay for in order to enforce their rights under the policy? So the surplus lines market is a very challenging market, and we need some more regulation on them. So I think it's better that it's in the domestic hands. I have an unpopular opinion, a very unpopular opinion about what could stabilize this market, and it involves the use of citizens.
I was going to ask about citizens.
Yeah. So citizens is supposed to be the stabilizer. They're supposed to be the insurance of last resort, and they're supposed to help stabilize the market. We have a problem with admitted carriers being underfunded. And to be honest with you, sir, we don't really know why these companies failed because we haven't seen their financials. We don't know what happened here. I suspect that it's undercapitalization and some other things. But citizens could be an entity that steps in and helps in this situation. And there was a big push years ago to depopulate citizens, and they paid carriers to take policies. Mm-hmm. So you're a startup carrier, we're going to pay you $125 for policy. Tell us how many you'll take, and we'll send them over to you. And that encouraged, in my view, some companies that were not well funded, well organized, or set up. So they took that money, they took premiums for a year. When claims started coming in or a natural disaster happened, they folded their tent. So citizens should be used at this time.
Well, citizens is being used at this time. I mean, Jim's been writing stories about, the hundreds of thousands of policies that are moving into citizens since the first of the year.
Yeah. So are they moving into citizens or are they moving into FIGA? Because the carriers that went belly up, those policies are getting moved to FIGA.
Both, actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot moving to both at this point.
Yeah. Well, I think that's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing for policies to go into citizens who has more of an opportunity to handle claims and more of an opportunity, they've got more of a surplus. So it's certainly better than claims going to FIGA.
So that would be more of a system where you've got a government-backed insurer that you think that system would be preferable to what we have now with this shaky insurance market from the private carriers.
I think that citizens could be a stabilizing force. I don't think that we should abandon the private insurance market, but I do think that citizens can take over some of the policies that folks are not getting written. They could have some effect on lowering premiums. And I think they could provide an alternative to homeowners who are not able to get insurance right now. That's another problem, right?
You alluded to the chief briefly to the chief financial officer, Jimmy Petronas. He came out with a proposal last week. It didn't get a lot of coverage, but one of the things in that proposal was to do away with AOBs, assignment of benefits, completely, which would be a pretty substantial change in state law and the insurance system. The AOB issue has been prominent for at least 4 years. Does the AOB system need to be maintained, and what would be the ramifications if it was eliminated?
So that's a great question. And I would say that the AOB system has been abused in the past. And so briefly, if we do away with it completely, it puts homeowners in a very difficult position after a catastrophic event or an event that requires them to have some kind of immediate handling. If your home burns down, there's not much that can be done immediately. If you have an active flooding event, right, you can dry your house out or get it dried out immediately, and the home becomes livable. Often folks don't have $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 on hand, and so these remediation companies say, hey, listen, we'll do this and we'll just work with your insurance company. So from conceptually, it's a good idea, right? And it helps homeowners, et cetera. The abuses that have taken place by the remediation companies are horrible. And my personal feeling about it is that you can't legislate to the outliers. You can't legislate to the bad actors. But you can, and we have laws on the books that can do this, you can go after those folks individually. There's an attorney solicitation problem going on right now. We have come out as an FJA and said, hey, that's inappropriate. And those people need to be turned into the bar. And the Department of Professional Regulation can and should look at the remediation contractors who are abusing that AOB system. So I don't know that it needs to be done away with completely. I think some of the modifications that they made a few years ago have helped. And I don't know why that isn't enough. That plus appropriate policing isn't enough to cure that problem.
So more of an enforcement issue.
It really is. Again, we can't legislate to the outliers. It would be like me going in and saying, listen, here's the worst case insurance company actor. Here's the worst that they have acted. And look, they've done this repeatedly. We need to have treble damages in every case just so we can make sure that people don't act like that. It would be, be laughed out of Tallahassee, right? We don't take the poster child of the worst situation. We have to use the laws that are on the books to handle those individually.
One of the other issues that was pretty prominent during the regular session this year and the special session was roof claims. Mm-hmm. And, there were some things put into place during the special session on roof claims, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came back again.
Right. Right.
Again, the argument from the other side is that there's a lot of abuses going on by roofers going out and soliciting business. A, do you think that's true? But B, what would be, they're talking about, there's deductible issues. There's, whether insurance companies should be able to drop customers if they don't have new roofs. Those sorts of issues are what's at play. How do you view those issues, and what would be the effects of making changes in those areas?
So the roof issue is very difficult for homeowners, right? The changes that were made in the legislative session and the further changes that they would like to make all involve cutting coverage, right? Reducing coverage for the policyholder. And so the policyholder, an insurance product is a product that you don't know how good it is until you have to use it, right? So you could pay your premiums for 50 years and die and never have a claim, and you don't even know if you had good insurance or bad insurance, kind of quote unquote. With respect to the roofs, you have an insurance product that we're paying more for, getting less, and then once you have a claim or go to use that product, you have hurdle after hurdle after hurdle and problem. So some of the things that we thought would be important with the roof changes are to look at how that impacts a regular household. What would be their participation in having to replace their roof? I think the idea here was to punish roofers and to get them, not looking at replacing roofs. And really, in some ways, the legislation has prompted people to replace their roofs so that they can qualify for full coverage or the most coverage that they can get, which has brought a whole new market into the roofing industry. So, in some ways that's a backfire. But with respect to the roofs, the real problem comes when people can't fix it. They don't have the money to do that. How does that work for them? And you don't really have a choice. It's not like you can negotiate a better insurance product and get full coverage. Insurance is a contract of adhesion. So it comes the way it does, and you might have a few variations, things that you can choose. But by and large, the reductions, the sublimits, the things that are buried and negotiated in the policy are done by our insurance commissioner. He's the chief negotiator for the people of the state of Florida for their insurance policies. And he has approved 1,500 rate increases. While the legislature was banting about whether we should change roof, requirements, he was in the back room approving roof endorsement changes. There's a question about mandatory arbitration, and again, the lawmakers want to banter or bat that around and put that through a process. He's in the back room again, out of the sunshine, approving those types of provisions and policies. And so as a chief negotiator for us, he is failing.
Can I ask you one other question about, do you find that it's in the appellate court system and in the Florida Supreme Court at this point, do you face it, is it harder to win these cases that when they go up on appeal? And I ask that in the context of how many conservative judges have been appointed by not only Governor DeSantis, but former Governor Scott, and even going back, there's some dating back to the Jeb Bush days, but have the courts changed in terms of their viewpoints of these issues?
Yes. Short answer to that is yes. They have become a very conservative, with a capital C, conservative court. And that, of course, has an effect on our willingness to challenge certain things or to bring those forward. The legislation that was enacted, the pre-suit intent to institute litigation, 6277152, last year, there was a debate about when that became effective. When is that effective? Do we have to do that now, or can we change an existing contract? And there's pretty solid constitutional law on our side, and the appellate courts came back favorable to us. But the carriers, of course, are pushing this into the Florida Supreme Court in the hopes of getting a different result. So what does that mean for the homeowner? Again, right? Because the homeowner is attached to that lawsuit. We are now looking at a situation where they go through an appeal and then have to go to the Florida Supreme Court to get a kind of a minor issue resolved. But the carriers are more emboldened to take things that far so that they can get some good law on the books for themselves. Which again, from the homeowner's perspective, is a very long process. And I just think some of the changes to expert, switching to kind of a federal standard and so on and so forth, It's all designed to decrease litigation. And, litigation is not a good thing. It's not a fun thing. Nobody wants to be in a lawsuit again. It's just the focus on how we're going to decrease litigation seems to be, let's just cut the rights of people who have legitimate claims. That's not fair.
You alluded to this at the top of the show, and I wanted to sort of, from the 30,000 foot level, people's homes are damaged. Their roofs are damaged. They can't afford to repair them. Insurance companies are saying, we are not maintenance companies. That's another thing that Fred mentioned quite a bit, that people are treating insurance policies as home maintenance policies, and they are not home maintenance policies, is what he was hammering that home. You're in a situation where you've been damaged, you can't afford to either rebuild. Everything is more expensive now than it was when you really... you're insured for a value that you would not probably be able to replace your house for. What are homeowners to do? I mean, it sounds kind of like their options are pretty bleak.
Their options are bleak. I listened to a bit of Fred's podcast, and he did mention the inflation guard. That is a really good thing to check into with the rising costs of construction that we have going on right now. Also, for folks who can't get insurance or who can't afford their insurance, the mortgage companies all have forced place insurance. And so we might be looking at a situation where you're better off just letting your mortgage company get your policy for you, although that's typically much more expensive than a regular policy, but at least it's coverage, and it doesn't cover as much at all, but at least it's some coverage.
But because you need to have coverage, and if you have a mortgage, which a lot of people do.
Yeah, right. Yep. So they will force place, and again, those policy premiums are higher than normal policies, and they cover less. And it's really the mortgage company is the first insured and the homeowner is the second insured. It's not a perfect system. It's far, far, far from it. But it is a last resort situation if you can't get insurance. So one thing I would like to mention that I'm not sure if consumers and homeowners are aware of is that the value of your policy, the amount that you insure your property for, is not the equivalent of the market value of your property at all, right? So you're insuring the structure, and the replacement cost estimate is really where that number needs to be. So if you think, well, I've got a $300,000 home, your lot may be worth 150 of that, and it would cost 150 to rebuild your home. So that's an important piece. You don't want to overbuy insurance, but if you can get a good replacement cost estimator, and as a point of fact, the agent and the carrier will do that estimate in setting your level. So it's not a bad thing to look at that. Hey, can I see my replacement cost estimator? And see if there's anything that you would like to adjust, or you can eyeball and say, hey, listen, I think it's going to be double that. Can I buy inflation guard? Can I buy additional insurance?
Is something that's still available to Floridians? I mean, I talk to my friends, other homeowners. People are kind of frightened about even mentioning anything to their insurance companies or to their agents, in the fear that they're going to get dropped. Jim's raising his hand. I'm probably speaking for myself there too.
Yeah, so I can understand that that's a valid fear. If I call and ask them to look at the replacement cost estimator, they might realize that I need more insurance and I have to pay more than what I've got, or they might drop me. So I can understand that that's a valid fear. it's okay to ask your agent for your application replacement cost estimator. Just say, you know, with all the insurance stuff going on, I'm trying to get my records in order. And I thought the advice of doing an annual checkup with your insurance agent is not a bad idea. But I also understand people are they're guarding their policy.
Yeah.
They're happy that they've got anything.
Right. If I close my eyes, maybe they won't see me.
Right. I mean, I was at Walgreens the other day and I got a little a few dollars off of my thing because of a rewards thing. And I was like, oh, well, that's the best thing that happened to me today. And she laughed. She said, well, I got my insurance bill today. And it was triple. This is a, elderly woman working at CVS talking about her insurance. I mean, it's everywhere. It's on everybody's mind right now.
Right. Well, it's on our mind, and we were very fortunate to have you here with us today, Amy Boggs, CEO of Boggs Law Group, for a deep dive into the consumer side of Florida's property insurance crisis. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dara.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.